Video game movie tie-ins are often a bit of a mixed bag, with most of them just coming across as a cheap cash grab to make some money off the back of the movie's success. Oftentimes they're just poorly made games, and they don't often star the actors from the movies. And Bruce Willis is actually no stranger to video games himself, having appeared in a game on the PS1 called Apocalypse. In this third-person shooter, Bruce Willis lent his likeness and his vocal talents to the role of the playable character. I mean, it's Bruce Willis in a video game. Great. Yet, despite that, for some reason, Bruce Willis has never played John McClane in any Die Hard video game. Which leaves me thinking, well then just who the hell are these imposters? And do they do a good job? Let's find out as I take a look at the fake John McClanes in Die Hard video games. First up, we have the original Die Hard, released on the NES Nintendo Entertainment System. So this is obviously a really old game, so there's not going to be any recorded dialogue, but we can still take a look at Johnny Boy himself. John? Is that you? Oh no, this is John McClane, but this is just the Karate Kid or something. What the hell? He doesn't have a fully white suit on, and he doesn't have full black hair, so I don't really know what they were going for here. This just doesn't look like John at all, which is really disappointing. However, that's not the only shots of John that you'll see in the game, as you'll often get these little mini cutscenes with a picture of John. The only problem with these is, I think John looks more like a young Anthony Hopkins than Bruce Willis. I mean, the face just doesn't look right at all. It's definitely not Bruce Willis. There are a couple of other shots towards the end in the final cutscenes that look more like John McClane, but it's still not quite right. So my verdict would be a 2 out of 10. He's more Hannibal McClane than John McClane, I think. Next up, we have Die Hard Trilogy on PlayStation 1, which is based on the first 3 movies. Now, the one we're going to be looking at mainly here is Die Hard 1, as this was a third-person shooter, whereas Die Hard 2 was first-person, so you never got to see John himself, and With a Vengeance was set entirely in a vehicle. So this is the John McClane that we have to look at. So, John McClane in the original had a white vest, black trousers and no shoes, and at least this version of the game gets that right with the character. So, while the character model isn't that great, it's more of a 2D sprite, I do like that he doesn't have the shoes, so he kind of does look like John. But, does he sound like him? Well, let's take a listen.
Ah, that's better. Get the hell out of here! Great! Happy trails. Nice! Ho ho ho! I've got a machine gun! Yippee-ki-yay! Yippee-ki-yay! Yippee-ki-yay!
Ugh, okay, well that's enough of that bad voice acting. It's not the worst, but it's still not great. This is a 5 out of 10. This is more budget McClane than John McClane, but I appreciate the effort, and with the technical limitations, it's not a bad job. You can tell who it's supposed to be, at least. Around the year 2000, we got a sequel, Die Hard Trilogy 2, Viva Las Vegas, which made up its own sequel storyline, and it offered the same sort of gameplay as the first trilogy game. However, now it brought with it improved graphics and features, as well as fully animated cutscenes with a 3D, fully voiced John McClane.
Where you been, man?
Wait.
What are you talking about?
What the?
Why does this always happen to me? Okay, Amir, get ready for company.
Oh no, that's not John.
Well, looks like it's time to pay a visit to Reese Hoffman at his new casino.
Oh, that's more like a South Park version of John McClane.
Hey kid, where can I find Reese Hoffman?
Sir? In the high rollers room, I think. You'll need to take the elevator, sir.
Hey, thanks for the tip.
Oh god, that is terrible. Okay, so he doesn't sound like him, but does he look like him at least? Well, kind of, I guess. It's kind of hard to tell because a lot of the game's cutscenes don't really show John's face. I guess they kind of wanted to avoid it because you would realise that it looks nothing like Bruce Willis. So all of these cutscenes tend to just show his back or from the side. And I think they knew that the voice actor was a bit shit as well, because most of the cutscenes he's never really talking, he's just sort of wandering around doing stuff. And the stuff he does isn't really that exciting. You'll see him struggle with his switches, running down corridors, running through car parks, running down more corridors, and that's pretty much it really. This doesn't feel like John McClane, and while the character model looks better than the original trilogy game, I still think this is worse, and that's why I'm going to give this a 4 out of 10, as it's more South Park McClane than anything, because that voiceover just really ruins it for me, and I just can't take him seriously as John McClane.
Scratch my car, punk, and I'll take it out of your paycheck.
Vegas, what a town.
Next up we have Die Hard Arcade on the Sega Saturn, which kind of isn't really a true Die Hard game, in a similar way as how Super Mario Bros. 2, the US and Europe version, isn't really a true Mario sequel, as it was more of a reskin of a different game, and that's what this is. This was, I think it was a game called Dynamite Cop, but it was turned into Die Hard, and as you can see here, from this blue jacket wearing guy, he doesn't really look like John McClane from the movies. And he doesn't really act like John McClane either, because this guy is just absolutely savage. What an asshole! So while I don't think the character acts like him because he's not actually John McClane, I will give them props that they were kind of lucky that the actual face of this character does kind of look more like John than what we've seen in any other game so far, so I'll give it a point for that at least. And later on in the game, he ends up looking more like the Die Hard 3 John McClane, as his clothes sort of wear off as you go through the game, so that does make it feel a little bit more like Die Hard. Plus the fact that you're in a building and some terrorists are trying to open a safe, it kind of has links to Die Hard, but it's just not Die Hard for me. However, there could be a saving grace here, because maybe he will sound like John McClane. Well, let's find out. Well, throughout the whole game, I never once heard him talk, and after getting to the final boss and hearing that guy talk, I kind of think it's for the best.
Just in time. This whole building will explode in 5 minutes. But you won't live to see it anyway! Ha 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 ha!
While the game is fun to play, it's not a true Die Hard for me, so he's more like John McClane than anything. 1 out of 10. We're desperately in need of a good John McClane in a video game now. So step forward, the next game, Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza, which was released on the PC, and it tells the story of the original Die Hard. And judging from the opening, it actually looks promising. This could be it, folks. We could finally have a good Die Hard game and a good John McClane in the game.
The music comes up and you live happily ever after, right? Alright, I tell you what. I'm gonna pull into the parking garage and
okay, well, Argyle doesn't sound great. Oh god, John's gonna talk in a sec. Please be good, please be good.
You're alright, Argyle.
Just remember that when you sign for the tip.
Oh, you know what? That was okay. That sounded alright.
I'm here to see Holly McClane. Just type it in there.
So while it doesn't sound exactly like Bruce Willis, it still feels like John McClane, and when he says lines from the movie, it definitely helps.
A CB radio. I can call for help with this. I should get up to the roof so I have a better signal. I could have used his shoes. 9 million terrorists in the world, and I gotta kill one with feet smaller than my sister.
Okay, so shockingly, John sounds pretty decent, but what does he look like? Well, I can't really say because it's a first-person shooter, and you never actually see John McClane himself, just his hands, and even the box art doesn't actually show his face. The character models for everyone else kind of resemble the characters that they're based on, but they're not perfect. Some are very much hit and miss. And in terms of sound, Hans Gruber doesn't really sound that great.
Put down the gun and give me my detonators.
Bill, you speak German?
Put it down. Now.
Pretty tricky with that accent. You ought to be on TV with that accent. But what do you want with the detonators, Hans? I already used all the explosives. Or did I?
I'm going to count to 3.
Like you did with Takagi? Oops. No bullets. You think I'm fucking stupid, Hans?
You were saying, shoot the glass.
Overall though, I have to say this is a pretty faithful recreation of Die Hard in video game form, and while it does take a few liberties with the gameplay and the amount of guns John gets, it is pretty fucking cool to play through and relive some of the famous scenes from the movie. And I think the guy who plays John McClane does a pretty decent job, and perhaps best of all, Reginald Val Johnson returns to his role as Sergeant Al Powell, lending his voice and likeness, which adds an air of authenticity to the game, making it feel even more like you're playing the movie. Even Holly McClane looks pretty spot on, though she is in a wrong coloured top. Overall, I'd give this a solid 7 out of 10, because the John McClane in this one feels like a TV show version of John McClane if they were ever to turn it into a TV series, and that's pretty good. The final game I'm going to be looking at today is Die Hard Vendetta on the PS2, which was released around the same time as Nakatomi Plaza, and just like that game, Reginald Val Johnson reprises his role once more as Sergeant Al Powell. My god, that guy must have been raking in the royalties for that at that point. While both games are first-person shooters, one of the things that helps set Vendetta apart from Plaza is the fact that we get to see John McClane in all his PS2 3D glory. Just look at him. This is the best version of a John McClane model in any of the Die Hard games. And while he doesn't look exactly like Bruce Willis, he still looks good enough as a John McClane stand-in. And I think they did a good job with the character model. And I like how they've actually aged him, which ties into the game's story. Another thing that sets it apart from the other titles, as it's doing its own story here and not trying to recreate one of the games. This one acts as Die Hard 4 essentially, before the actual Die Hard 4 came out, telling a story about a slightly older John McClane who's going up against Piet Gruber, Hans Gruber's son, who eventually kidnaps John's daughter, Lucy, who is now a grown-up cop working on the force alongside her father. And one of the things I like about this John McClane is that he shows a range of emotions, and he's not just reading lines from the other movies, he's an actual character in this game. He gets mad and angry and frustrated when he can't find Lucy and when he knows she's in danger and he's worried for her, and he also has time to make those snarky sort of sarcastic remarks that Bruce Willis was most famous for in this role. The story's by no means perfect, and Piet Gruber is just a poor man's Hans Gruber, but it's still a fun tale, especially when you go back to Nakatomi Plaza towards the end of the game. It's a nice throwback to the original movie, but again, it's still doing its own story, which is pretty cool. Nakatomi Plaza felt the most like a Die Hard experience. However, it also worked against it that it stuck so close to the movie, as it often felt like a cheap imitation of the film, whereas Vendetta, telling its own unique story, allows it to just be more open and just more sort of its own thing. And it's quite cool to catch up with John McClane after all those years, especially when we hadn't actually seen Live Free or Die Hard at that point. So I think this is the definitive version of John McClane in video game form. Now, while it's not the best Die Hard game, I still think it's the best showing of John McClane in any of the games so far. But it can definitely be topped, and that is why it gets a 7.5 out of 10.
That could be a little tricky.
So there you have it, that's all of the John McClanes ranked from worst in arcade to the best, Bruce Willis himself. Do you agree with this order? Let me know in the comments below. Any more that I've maybe missed? Let me know that as well, and I might check them out in a future video. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave a like or a comment, maybe even subscribe if you've enjoyed these Die Hard Christmas videos so far. And I'll see you again tomorrow for another one. Cheers, bye.